Can Vandy pull the upset versus the Texas Longhorns? It's crossover time. Keep it locked.
You are Locked On Vandy, your daily podcast on the Vanderbilt Commodores, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Who would have thought at the beginning of the season that this would be a ranked matchup, the Texas Longhorns versus the Vanderbilt Commodores? Jonathan Davis from Locked On Longhorns, Corey Burton from Locked On Vandy. This is another Locked On crossover, previewing, talking about one of the biggest games of the weekend. We see how Vanderbilt has looked pretty salty this year. Texas, still a top 5 team in the country, coming off the loss to Georgia. We discuss on the Locked On crossover, once again, between Locked On Longhorns and Locked On Vandy. And Corey, I want to get right into it. And I want to ask you the question, what has the ride been like this year for Vandy football? Because normally when we talk about Vandy, we're talking about academics. We're talking about the baseball team. We're talking about Skip Bayless, maybe the most notable alum that at least people know about, right? Yeah. But now you look at this football team coming into the season, they get Diego Pavia at quarterback, and it's just been magical, right? The first week of the season, they have the overtime win against Virginia Tech. Then you go to double overtime in the first SEC game against Missouri. You beat Alabama for the first time in 40 years. You beat Kentucky. Now this team is sitting at 5-2 and ranked in the AP poll for the first time in a decade, I believe, at number 25. So just what has the ride been like for you covering Vandy this year, Vandy football fans, and just the buzz in Nashville around this team?
Well, let's take it back to November. I agreed to do the show back in November because this is a brand new show. So as soon as they walked off the field against Tennessee and Knoxville, it was at its lowest point. It was pretty much rock bottom. I was thinking I was coming into a coaching change immediately, starting the show. Things couldn't have been worse. People were jumping off the bandwagon. Your players were leaving in droves, all that good stuff. And then Clark Lee's first move decides to take over as defensive coordinator. When they retain, they say, we're not firing you. He takes over as defensive coordinator. I'm like, okay, that's a pretty solid move. Fires his offensive coordinator. I'm like, okay, that's another solid move. We'll see how it plays out. Then he hires Jerry Kill. So when he hired Jerry Kill and Tim Beck, that's when I was like, okay, he's serious. Because Jerry Kill, if you know a lot about Jerry Kill, he's a program builder. He's done it everywhere he's been. He would be at a major P4 school right now had it not been for his medical problems. But he comes in as the chief consultant to Clark Lee, who really he's the assistant head coach. He's the other head coach. And then they go and get Pavia, and then the rest is history. So the ride has been amazing. It's been from January, they get a new strength program. They get a bunch of people in the portal. And back in January, I was like, okay, I see all these moves. I'm like, this isn't going to be the same Vandy team. They're going to – I don't know what exactly it's going to look like, but it was sometime back in like April, right after spring practice, I made the prediction of bowl game. And people acted like I was crazy. And now we're one game away from that happening. I called the Virginia Tech upset. Happened. So it's been crazy, like seeing how the fans have slowly started to jump on, because they're always skeptical, how they slowly jump on, and then bam, it's there now. And it's been a lot of fun covering Vanderbilt. Basketball is going through a little bit of resurgence as well, and baseball is baseball. So it's been fun, man. It's been really fun, and Pavia has been phenomenal to watch. This team this year is super fun to watch.
Going into the Alabama game, that's obviously the biggest game on, Vanderbilt's schedule. Of course, now this Texas game is pretty big. Vanderbilt, the only SEC team with a winning record against Texas, which is pretty crazy to say, obviously back in the day. But going into the Alabama game, going into that matchup, how confident were you that Vanderbilt could knock off that Alabama team that at the time was undefeated, had just beaten Georgia, and was the number 1 team in the country?
Well, I saw something in the second half because I watched that Georgia-Alabama game, and I saw something in the second half where Bama looked a little bit vulnerable. They looked I knew that if Vandy could get them on their heels, they had a good chance of keeping them there, and they did that, and they controlled the ball, and Alabama panicked. So all week I was confident and all those things had to align, but I was like, Vandy can do this. It's not impossible. Whereas last year I would have said Bama can name their score. But yeah, I was pretty confident just based on how Vandy plays, how they played against Missouri, how Alabama kind of shifted in the second half and became a team that was sitting back on their heels and just kind of panicked and didn't really know what to do in that situation when Georgia was blitzkrieging them and stuff like that. So, it was, yeah, I got more confident throughout the week.
Yeah, for sure. And then now when you look at this matchup, Texas, Vandy coming into what looks like is becoming, a decent place to play, right? In Nashville, people always talked about that, the biggest thing that may happen to a team on the road going against Vandy is that they have too much fun in Nashville, right? One of my favorite cities. But now you're playing in that stadium. It's a bunch of Vanderbilt fans in there. They're hyped up. They have something to root for. And, it could be a tough place to play. And so going into this matchup against Texas, what are your thoughts between Vandy and the Longhorns?
I never thought I would say Vandy Stadium was a tough place to play, but it's starting to turn that way, and the renovations are only going to help that. But it's always been a weird environment at Vanderbilt because, it's like kind of a home road game for Vandy. And so the atmosphere is always kind of weird and it throws teams off a little bit. But, coming into this matchup, like I want to see how Texas responds to losing to Georgia. And I want to see kind of how they respond with the quarterback situation. I want to see kind of how they respond because Texas is the most talented one, aside from Georgia, the most talented team in the country. I mean, I really believe that Texas is an amazing team, and I think they do a lot of great things well. And they just kind of ran into a Georgia team that was extremely motivated and had a great game plan against them. So I wonder how mindset-wise how you guys are coming into this game as far as, okay, we've got some things now that we didn't know were problems. Do those spiral or do you quickly fix them and get back on track and take care of business? That's kind of like the if factor. Like Vanderbilt is hoping that Texas is still kind of reeling a little bit after that loss, still trying to figure out the answers that they didn't know they needed. And Diego Pavia can come in and sneak up on them and get them. But the flip side of that is Texas is very capable of coming in here and just running over them and running past them just like that.
Yeah, I think we have to, continue to see how the Longhorns respond to adversity. Coming into the game against Georgia, they had not, dealt with any type of adversity. They had not been punched in the mouth. And, we saw it. Steve Sarkisian, you're down 20, maybe overreacts, at least in my opinion, and puts in Arch Manning. That doesn't work. Then you have to go back to Quinn Ewers. Quinn Ewers plays one of his worst games at the University of Texas, certainly probably his worst game in a couple of years. So how does he respond coming back, against Vanderbilt, right? Is his confidence shaken, or is it just, back to business now that he's not playing a defense that can get after you like Georgia? We saw a team that was not able to run the ball last week, and we saw what the Steve Sarkisian offense, more importantly, looks like when you're not able to run the ball. So do they come into this game, which I think is, going to be a very interesting storyline, right? Does Steve Sarkisian kind of get back to the basics and come back and say, okay, we need to run the ball and then take our shots on the play action and the RPO outside of that? Or does he come into this game and say, Quinn Ewers, you were obviously visibly shaken last week, had a bad game. We want you to come out and get comfortable and get that confidence back by throwing it all over the yard. And then when you look at it, when you look at the type of plays, and we'll talk about him a little bit more in the second segment, but the type of playmaker that Diego Pavia is, do you want to get into that type of shootout where it's, Quinn Ewers versus Diego Pavia, possibly who has the ball last going into the fourth quarter? So there's just so many interesting storylines or matchups in this game. But I do think we need to see some resolve from the Texas Longhorns, right? See what type of fight, the Texas fight that we talk about all the time, that they have, right? Because when you look at Vanderbilt now, obviously, based on what they've done through 7 games, this Texas team can't. I mean, at least I hope they can't just think that they can, walk into Nashville and just beat Vanderbilt, and this is going to be an easy game coming off of Georgia. This is going to be a dogfight, right? I mean, this team, Vanderbilt, the Commodores, are playing up against some of the best talent in the country. At that point, Missouri was still a top 10 team, and we thought, Missouri may be, a playoff contender. Now, kind of remains to be seen. But at that point, Missouri was still looked at as one of the best teams in the country. Vanderbilt takes them to double overtime, right? And then you play against Alabama. Nobody gives Vanderbilt a chance. They beat them. Then Vanderbilt gets disrespected again against Kentucky. I think y'all were double digit. How How many point favorites were Vanderbilt against Kentucky? Kentucky against Vanderbilt?
13.5 was the final
13.5 after y'all beat Alabama and then y'all beat Kentucky, right? So at this point, there's no way that the Longhorns can just come in and think that they can just beat up on Vandy. But, you have to respond, to losing to Georgia, and you have to come back and show your dominance. You're still a top 5 team in the country. Like you said, still one of the most talented teams in the country. And I think they need to come in and put that on display against the Vanderbilt Commodores, but it's not going to be easy. And that's why it's 2 ranked teams playing against each other. It's going to be one of the best matchups in the country. We're going to get to our sponsors real quick, and then we're going to talk about more Vandy and more Texas in the second half, one of the few ranked matchups in the country this weekend. And, of course, it's in the SEC, where it just means a little bit more. All right, this Locked On crossover between Locked On Vandy and Locked On Longhorns brought to you by FanDuel. Hey, NFL fans, college football fans alike, you can start the season with a big return on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. So when you get a hunch in the middle of the game, you can check out the latest stats, view live play-by-play, and so much more on the same page where you place your bets. You'll get started with $200 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place your first $5 bet. So that's FanDuel.com. Place your bets today. Now, Corey, what I do want to ask you is we talked about a team that's been, just absolutely electric in SEC play, probably a few plays away, right, from beating Missouri and being undefeated in SEC play thus far. But this is also a team that lost to Georgia State, a Georgia State football team that has not won a game since they beat Vanderbilt, right? So what happened there, and, how do we know what Vanderbilt team is going to show up this weekend? Is it the team that beat Alabama, or is it the team that lost to Georgia State?
I think the team that lost to Georgia State would have lost to Ball State last week. I think that was a weird occurrence where they didn't want to be there. They were out of it mentally. They weren't focused. They didn't take care of the ball. Pavia was off. The defense was off, and they just didn't want to be there. And they were like, we're playing a G5 game on the road, and that's just lackadaisical loss of focus, and Georgia State was extremely motivated. I think you're going to get the team that showed up against Alabama, honestly. And I think they learned from that experience. I think they walked off the field completely embarrassed and humiliated at Georgia State. And Pavia, I guarantee you, lit into that team. He's probably one of the best player leaders that I've seen in quite some time on any team. And he probably lit into that team, and they bought hook, line, and sinker. The very next game, they take Mizzou to double overtime. They're like 3 plays away from winning that game. A couple missed kicks and a deep ball to Luther Burden away from winning that game. They go out and beat Alabama. They go on the road and beat Kentucky. And then they have a little bit of a mental letdown, but they do beat Ball State. Whereas like normally a mental letdown for Vanderbilt is a loss in that type of situation, but they were able to do enough to win that game. And it was obvious they were looking ahead to Texas, and they're excited about Texas. They've had a really good week of practice so far, and getting a couple guys back from injury is going to kind of really boost morale with Langston, Patterson, and Miles Capers on defense. And that's going to be good for them. But for Texas, I want to know, because anytime a team plays against an option style team, it's always a challenge. It's always tricky. Do you think Sark has been working on option periods throughout the whole season, like throughout the spring, throughout summer camp, and like really kind of getting ready for this? Or is this just one of those things where they were like, hey, this is Vandy, we're just going to deal with it when we get there? But the option attack it's not easy to go up against, and it really focuses on putting guys on islands. And what Vandy does a really good job of is spreading the field out and putting those guys, isolating those conflict defenders, and really forcing them to make plays in space. Texas has got to be ready for that. How do you think they're preparing for that? How do you think they're ready for that, especially with the guys on the edges, the safeties, the outside linebackers, and even the inside linebackers at this point?
Yeah, I think somewhere in the middle of that philosophy that you mentioned, right? I don't think that, all offseason they were thinking about, the Vandy offense and what this was going to look like. I'm not even sure if they knew, if anybody knew, if you knew, what the Vandy offense would look like, and, how potent it would be. But I also don't think, they're coming into the game, especially after what happened against Georgia, and just saying, oh, it's just Vandy, we'll figure it out when we get there. And I think, this defense has looked really good, but if there's one kind of Achilles heel or one place that you can possibly get this Texas defense, look, when you got one of them playing in Nashville, when you lose players like Tavondre Sweat and Byron Murphy up front, you're not going to have the same run defense that you had last year that was, number 3 in the country. And so you're going to have to be disciplined, right? You're going to have to be focused, gap sound, football sound, and really be where you're supposed to be, because this Vanderbilt offense gives you so many different things to defend. And, if you're out of place, next thing you know, Vanderbilt is running it in, hitting their head on the goalpost for 6. So I think that is going to be a very interesting matchup. When you see this Texas run defense, it has not been great, right? It's been good at times, but it's not been great. They gave up a 50 to 60 yard run to the UTSA running back. They gave up a 100-yard rusher against Colorado State. Obviously, Trevor Etienne went for over 100 scrimmage yards last week, in the Georgia game. I think 85 of those rushing. So that definitely is a place, where Vanderbilt can certainly have some success against this Texas defense. And it's not just the running backs, right? Diego Pavia, just a magic maker. I've seen him. He's sneaky fast, right? Just making plays, making defenders miss. So, you could look up and, give up 50, 60 rushing yards to him, if not more, if you're not careful. So, that's certainly going to be one of the biggest matchups. Can this Texas defense be gap disciplined and gap sound and, prevent, Vanderbilt from really being able to run the ball, control the clock, and be dynamic with that running game? And it sounds crazy because Diego Pavia can beat you both ways, but can you force him to stay in the pocket and force him to beat you with his arm from the pocket? Because when you look at Diego Pavia, like I said, he's just a playmaker. And to me, he's a force multiplier, right? He's the type of quarterback that is going to make everybody around him better. When you look at this Vanderbilt roster, there's not too many names that jump out at you. But then when you're playing against them or when you're watching them on Saturday, you're like, damn, right? He's making plays. He's making plays. Yeah. He's making plays, right? And I think it's, like you said, Diego Pavia, just a leader, a playmaker. I think that he gets the most out of all of his guys. And he talked about how growing up, coming up watching football, Johnny Manziel was his guy. And, I hate to put him in the same breath as a guy that won the Heisman, but you just see so much of that, right? How Johnny just had that Texas A&M team, and they had talent. Of course, Texas A&M had talent. But Johnny, just every Saturday, you felt like you had a chance because you had that guy. And to me, based on what I've seen watching Vanderbilt this season, Diego Pavia is that guy. And, coming into this game, this could be a matchup where whoever has the best quarterback on Saturday wins this game between Texas and Vandy. And I think that would have been crazy coming into this season to say or to ask who would win the quarterback matchup between Diego Pavia and Quinn Ewers. It seems a little bit more realistic based on what we've seen the last couple of weeks. What has Diego Pavia meant to this program, and do you see some Johnny Manziel in him in the way that he plays?
Oh, absolutely. I see a bunch of Johnny Manziel in him, the way he plays. He's a playmaker. He can make guys miss in space. He can create, and he is good. He is good, sneaky good throwing the ball through the air. They really like to move the pocket with him, and he can locate guys. He's way better on the deep ball than I thought he was. That was one of the things I said he had to improve on the most if Vandy was going to have a chance coming into the season, was deep ball accuracy and being able to be able to push it vertical. And I said if Vanderbilt could ever push it vertical somewhat consistently, they were going to be trouble because of the rushing attack and the rushing capability that they have. So yeah, he is absolutely Johnny Manziel to a T as far as what he does to the guys around him, what he can create on his own, and the way that he makes plays. And it just kind of, you get him dead to rights on a third down in the backfield. The next thing you know, he's slipped out of 2 or 3 tackles and he's got 8 yards and a first down. And you're like, what the heck just happened? And then he does that like 10 more times on that drive. And then they've eaten 8 minutes off the clock and they've scored a touchdown. And now the other team's kind of panicking, like, okay, we're not going to get the ball very much. So we got to make things happen. And that's where the mistakes go. And the defense feeds off that. Special teams feeds off that. And it's just been it's just shockwaves through the entire team has, that's the impact that he's had on this program. And just him doing that has elevated everybody, and it's been phenomenal to watch. And Jerry Kill has been kind of leading that charge as well.
Yeah, and when you look at it, Vanderbilt, one of the hardest teams in the country to get off the field on third down, and it's just because they're just so hard to stop. Diego Pavia, savvy, making plays in the passing game or in the running game, their ability to run the ball, the way that they call plays, the different things that they throw at you, just an exceptional offense. Really, I want to ask you before we get into this last break and then get into the last segment, you can bring in all the culture builders, you can bring in the guys that can build a program, but you have to have, the guys that can play football as well, and sometimes it's not the X's and O's, but it's the Jimmies and the Joes. You know what I mean? You got that in Diego Pavia. And so who would you credit this kind of Vandy resurgence to? If you had to give the biggest piece of the pie to somebody, would it be Diego Pavia at quarterback, the most important position on the field, or would it be Clark Leah and the staff changes that he made coming into this season?
I think the staff changes kind of led to Diego Pavia. If they don't get Tim Beck and Jerry Kill, I don't think Diego Pavia is Diego Pavia. They all kind of came as a package deal. So, there's kind of like multiple answers on that. But if I had to pinpoint one move, it would be Jerry Kill.
Okay. All right. Good answer. Good answer. A quick word from the sponsors. Again, talk a little bit more about Vandy and Texas, and then we pick the game, right? Who wins the game and why? What needs to happen for Texas to win? What needs to happen for Vanderbilt to pull off their second huge upset of the season? All right, this Locked On crossover also brought to you by Game Time, the best ticketing app in the industry. Game Time has a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets to see your favorite teams play live even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats, so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. Priority Game Time Picks creation makes it easier to save more on sports, concerts, comedy, theater, etc. All in pricing. Toggling this feature shows the total up front with no surprise fees at checkout. Seat views, get a panoramic view from your seat in the app before you buy. The lowest price guarantee or Game Time will credit you 110% of the difference. Game Time ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Corey, when you look at this matchup, like you said, Texas is one of the most talented teams in the country. Texas still, even with the loss to Georgia, a bona fide, legitimate national championship contender. So to pull off this upset, obviously Diego Pavia has to play out of his mind, similar to the way that he did against Alabama. But who are some X factors? Who are some players for you that are going to have to make a name for themselves on Saturday for Vanderbilt to not only to cover the 18 and a half point spread, but get the victory against the Texas Longhorns?
Well, aside from Diego Pavia, it's got to be Cedric Alexander, the running back. He's been phenomenal all year long. He's got to continue to be phenomenal. A little banged up. He's a Texas native too, so I think this game.
Austin kid, I believe, right?
Yeah, actually an Austin kid. So not just Texas, but right there in the Longhorns' backyard. But he's got to have a big game. I think you have to have a big game. Eli Stowers is going to be an X factor, the tight end. He had 8 catches for 130 last week against Ball State.
Another Texas kid, right? All the Texas kids are trying to beat the Longhorns, right?
Yeah, he's been phenomenal all year long. He's been an absolute weapon. Quincy Skinner, I think, is going to have to be more consistent and show out against Texas in the passing game. He's somebody that can make plays, but just doesn't make enough of them in the passing game, which is kind of the next step in the progression there. Defensively, Langston, Patterson, and Miles Capers, I think, are going to have to do a really good job coming back from injury. Miles Capers, especially coming off the edge, if he can get some hits on Quinn Ewers and get him off his spot, get him out of rhythm, and maybe even force a couple of turnovers, that could really turn the tide there for Vanderbilt. And then in the secondary, C.J. Taylor and Martell Height are 2 DBs that need to have massive games. Randon Fontenette. And, he's kind of that safety, that box safety that can make things happen in different types of situations. So this defense, if they can slow Texas to a grind, if they can drive this tempo down and force Texas to snap the ball multiple times in a drive, and Clark Lee even said the more times they snap it and they're not in the end zone, the better it is for us. If they limit the possessions, they limit the points, and they give themselves a chance in the end. And then, of course, Diego Pavia, the same thing on offense. Be efficient, but be effective at the same time. Hold the ball, control it, things like that. And then use the same game plan, really, they used against Alabama as far as that goes. And they can really control the tempo of this game. I think that'll get Texas kind of out of whack, and that gives us our best chance.
Yeah, I think the thing with Vanderbilt is you want to kind of put the pressure on Texas. You want this to be a close game in the third or fourth quarter to where one mistake, one drive can tilt the game into Vanderbilt's favor, right? And then you kind of punch, and land that haymaker when you can. I think the key for the Texas Longhorns is you have to get back to running the ball, right? We saw what happens when you can't run the ball and you kind of force Quinn Ewers to just throw the ball 30, 40 times. That's not the recipe for success. I think Trey Wisner and Jaden Blue need to touch the ball 30 to 35 times combined in this game. And depending on game flow, if you're up, that should happen naturally, right? It's something that you don't have to force. So you're going to have to run the ball. And I think get back to getting those easy shots off of play action and the RPOs. And I think Quinn Ewers is just going to have to be better. But I think also Steve Sarkisian can do a really good job of making him comfortable by giving him some layups early. Running the ball, giving him some layups. And then if you can run the ball and, suck those defenders in, then, those easy opportunities to push the ball down the field should be there later. And then Texas has some of the best athletes in the country, so that should lead to some run after catch. On the defensive side of the ball, this is a defense that has forced a turnover in every game this season. And I think that Texas should, be able to beat Vanderbilt. But to ensure that you don't have an upset, or Vanderbilt doesn't get too much confidence and end up beating you at the end, I think they're going to have to force, this Vanderbilt offense into a turnover or two, give an extra possession to the Texas offense. And then this game is really going to come down to who can control the clock the best, right? Because like I said, it's going to be hard to get Vanderbilt off the field on the third downs with everything they can present to you on the offensive side of the ball. So I think the best way to keep Vanderbilt off the field or get Vanderbilt off the field is to keep that Texas offense on the field, keep rolling, but make sure you're getting touchdowns instead of field goals, right? And I think that you eventually can just put enough pressure on this Vanderbilt offense to where they can't just run the option and, hit you with all these different run plays. They're going to have to throw the ball to catch up, and just throwing the ball against one of the best pass defenses in the country over and over again will not be a recipe for success for this Vanderbilt football team. So, like I said, I think Texas needs to get back to running the ball, making, situations for Quinn Ewers to be comfortable, allow him to be surgical once again in the short or intermediate game. And then I think this defense needs to continue to put the pressure on Vanderbilt's passing offense, be sound against the run, and force Diego Pavia to throw the ball 40, 45 times and beat you that way. And I just don't think he'll be able to against this Texas pass defense, which is one of the best in the country, even against Carson Beck, who everybody said Carson Beck would come in and kind of show that it was a fluke, right? And they forced him into 3 turnovers. I think they can do the same thing against Diego Pavia. Corey, who wins this game on Saturday and why?
I'd be remiss if I didn't pick Vanderbilt. I mean, I think they're going to pull the upset because I think they're going to be able to control the clock. I think until the team proves that they can't control the clock and control the tempo, an SEC team that is. I think they're going to do. I think they're going to do that, and I think Pavia's going to have a massive game. I don't think he's going to have to throw more than 20 times, and I think they're going to. I think Texas is going to be still kind of off kilter, and that's going to put them out of rhythm.
Yeah, I think Texas wins this game, one, just because, I think there's just too much, right? I think they just have a little bit too much for Vanderbilt, but I guess Alabama coming into, Nashville probably said the same thing.
Conventional wisdom would say, throw that out with this year's Vanderbilt team, throw that out the window, really.
Right. And I think when you look at it, I think the worst thing for Vanderbilt is that this is no longer a trap game. Right. Yeah. I think if they had not lost to Georgia, if they had beat Georgia, they were riding high, they were still the number 1 team in the country, that you could be smelling yourself a little bit too much and then come in there against a tough Vanderbilt team and, not play your best football. I think the fact that they got embarrassed on national TV in the fashion that they did against the Georgia Bulldogs means that Vanderbilt will probably get the best performance that we've seen from the Texas Longhorns this season. I think that Quinn Ewers at this point, because he got benched, albeit for 2 series, I mean, he's fighting for his life, fighting for his job, fighting for his draft stock, right? So I think we see a renewed version of Quinn Ewers. And I think this defense that, was, playing lights out against, Georgia and lost that game, I think they come back and, continue to take everything that's been said about them personally, that they haven't played anybody, that, they aren't really elite. They've just played a bunch of bad offenses. And I think they come out and make a statement against Vanderbilt. So I think that this team shows resolve. There's too much talent on it. There's too much there's too good of a culture that's been built over the last couple of years. This isn't the same Texas football team, and I think they have an opportunity to prove it, right? And then the narrative is because we hadn't played anybody before Georgia that, oh, maybe Texas isn't SEC ready. And, you know, if you can prove it against Vanderbilt, I guess this would be the time to do it. So I think Texas comes out and, you know, proves that they're SEC ready this Saturday and gets the win against a very tough Vanderbilt team. I'm not sure if they cover, you know, but covering only matters for the people that are putting money on the games, right? For Texas, whether you win by 1 point or 18 points, you're just trying to go to Nashville and get a victory. So any last thoughts on this matchup, Corey, before we get out of here?
Yeah, I didn't have back in January on my bingo card that Texas was going to be a pivotal game like this. When I was going through my schedule analysis, I was like, originally I was chalking this one, loss. Okay, Vanderbilt's going to go 6-6, but Texas, Alabama, Missouri, we're all going to be losses, and we're here now. So it's new territory, and I like it. And this is going to be a fun matchup, and I hope you Longhorn fans enjoy Nashville.
Oh yeah, I don't think you have to hope anybody enjoys Nashville. It's such a fun time in that city. And I'm just gonna say it's crazy going into this game that Texas and Vanderbilt are both ranked. I mean, I don't think it's crazy that Texas is ranked, but obviously Vanderbilt at number 25, first time in a decade that they're ranked. And I'm sorry that it's only gonna last 7 days for y'all, but yeah, it's only gonna last 7 days for y'all. Thank y'all for tuning in to a Locked On crossover, Locked On Vandy, Locked On Longhorns. Make sure you're subscribing to both channels for great content on the Texas Longhorns and Vanderbilt Commodores, and should be one of the best games in the country this weekend. A big time ranked SEC matchup where it just means more. Peace.
Just means more. Peace.